Hello, everyone around the world. Welcome. Bienvenidos, que calos irfete, to Coloring My Way Across the Globe. I'm your host, Lauren Battistini, color consultant, artist, language learner, and world traveler. Join me each week as I chronicle the most colorful people, places, and experiences I encounter off the beaten path, both near and far. So, let's go. Vámonos, que pame. Welcome back to the studio, friends, for another episode of Coloring My Way Across the Globe. I'm your host, Lauren Battistini. It's a pleasure to have you here. Before we begin this two-part episode, I'd like to share with you some statistics about the podcast. It has been listened to already in 16 countries, 92 cities worldwide, and across every continent minus Africa. And I'm looking forward to expanding our audience as we go. Thank you again for being here today. Again, this is a two-part series. It is called New Orleans of Yesteryear and Natchez of Today. I'm very excited about the episode. So today's guest is the esteemed Reverend Dennis Flach, who himself is a third-generation New Orleanian who very happily now resides in Natchez, Mississippi. Reverend Flach, of course, is a pastor. He holds 2 master's degrees, one of which is in special education, the second of which is a Master's of Divinity with an emphasis or focus on missions and church planting. Reverend Flach is a world traveler, and we will be talking about that in part 2 of the episode. He is also a proud husband, father of 2, and grandfather of 5. Welcome to Coloring My Way Across the Globe, Reverend Flach.
Thank you, Lauren. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. And I know that my audience is going to very much benefit from all of your storytelling. You are a storyteller and you have a lot to talk about. I want to start with the fact that you are at least third generation New Orleanian. And I want to talk about what it was like in your era of growing up in New Orleans. So let's start with your childhood just a little bit.
Well, there are a whole bunch of things that come to my mind with respect to growing up in New Orleans. I was born there. The hospital where I was born is gone. It was near Bayou St. John, which is a lovely little waterway. Anyway, I began to realize the benefits of being in New Orleans with the family. My grandmother especially, she and I always found ways to get around New Orleans. And so I can be describing to you the New Orleans of the 50s into the 60s especially. It's quite a different city now. Hurricane Katrina has had adverse impact on the population. There are areas that have still not recovered. So there are places of real sadness, as well as places of renewal and re-energizing communities. So the fight's still on to regain New Orleans. I doubt it would regain what it looked like in the 50s, but I can tell you that viewing the 50s as a child was really quite an experience.
So what are you mentioned your mama, your grandmother.
Yes.
And you had a very special bond with her, and in her eyes, you could do no wrong.
That was true.
I know you've said that.
Yes.
So what are some of the day-to-day, or at least the weekend activities you would do when you'd spend time with your mama?
Well, it would mean leaving my own home with my mother and father, 2 little brothers, and it would be going to her house and spending the weekend. It was always something I looked forward to. It happened most weekends. I would be spending the weekends with Mama. And it was always an adventure. She worked at D.H. Holmes, a regional retailer in New Orleans. In downtown New Orleans at the time, we're talking about shoulder-to-shoulder foot traffic moving through New Orleans. We're talking about a time where World War II had come to an end. It ended in 45. I was born in 46. So by the time I'm walking and moving around, I'm attached to my mom, and we're going through the city. We're going to movies. We're going to restaurants. The foods were just fabulous. The pastries were remarkable. There were different ethnic pastry operations all around the city, as there were many different culture groups. It was truly, in the early 50s, I recognized it to be a multicultural city that had vibrancy, had unique characteristics that you wouldn't find any other place. It was just a real joy to get around, and quite a safe place to get around in, unlike a lot of metro areas today. And of course, New Orleans follows that same trend. with safety, the matter of safety, the difficulties in moving through metropolitan areas with a sense of ease of movement and low probabilities of any type of criminality around you. You could just move about quite safely. A child could move about quite safely. So, in those respects, I can remember coming down with with very sore throats on occasion, or upper respiratory something or other. Maybe it was an influenza that we didn't know at the time. And my mom would say, "Well, Dan, what you need is a good outdoor fresh air experience. Come on." And we would travel the public transportation system, ending up on trolley cars that would go down Canal Street, the main heart and artery of transportation in New Orleans. And it would go right to the end of its line, which was the river, the Mississippi River. And in those days, you needed ferries to get back and forth from one side of the river, from the east bank where New Orleans is located, to the west bank. But we would get on the ferry. Mama never drove, and she never owned a car, so it was always public transportation, which was highly developed back in the 50s. And it was safe transportation. It was wonderful transportation for everyone. Everyone safely used the transportation system in New Orleans. So we would take all the way down to the Canal Street car, travel to the end where the ferry was located at the river, and we would go back and forth across the river. Usually in the wintertime, I would come down with something, and that's when I would be required to take in good fresh air, which was air coming off the Mississippi River with Mama. And so she would be freezing cold, I'd be sitting there cold, and but just taking in the air and being with Mama, and the breezes and the smells of New Orleans and the food and the cooking and all was intermixed over the river. It was just a wonderful experience. It was a special time because she took time from all of the other things she could be doing, and she sat with me, was with me. Presence was everything. Her presence especially. She was phenomenal.
That's so sweet. Well, let's talk about the international aspect of New Orleans. And your heritage is a great example of that. New Orleans, I see it, is such a ethnically blended and culturally blended place. So let's talk about ethnicity a little bit.
As I mentioned, it really was, and I think to a much lesser extent, remains a international community. But in the hustle and bustle of New Orleans of the 50s and into the 60s, where you had foot traffic, malls were not that developed yet, wasn't even a concept in the 50s really in New Orleans, in that metro area. But it was busy, and there were some established local businesses that would cause you to go downtown. If you needed clothing, you would go downtown. If you needed luggage, you would go downtown. If you needed housewares, you would go downtown, or furniture. You'd always be finding somewhere on the side streets of Canal Street, the main artery through the downtown area, or you would be on Canal Street itself. Many different people had, I think of Meyer the Hatter. Mr. Meyer was a long-standing New Orleanian. He passed away, I think, I don't remember, I think maybe in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
There are heirs that carry on the business. It's a unique place. These were men of Jewish descent, worked hard at the businesses, and there was a strong and vibrant Jewish ethnic community within New Orleans. A lot of leadership, a lot of generous giving occurred through that community. There were also pockets where Italian culture would be located, and they would have a number of traditions that they would be kept. We would encounter smaller pockets of Polish people. They would be located. I especially enjoyed the Greek population because they knew how to make great donuts. And right around the corner from my grandmother, Mama, spending the weekend there, it was nothing for us to be on our way to church or coming back from church, in walking distance even. We would stop in at the Greeks. And it was a corner pastry operation. Everything was homemade. They would have a nice flow of traffic. It was not so overcrowded. You were tired when when you finally got served. So it was a good pace to the place, delicious foods, and I would either get the glazed donuts, which were fabulous, but running in a close second were the donuts that were chocolate covered, and it was a nice firm sugar coated chocolate that they used. I was awash in joy with chocolate milk or white milk. It'd be fabulous.
I have to interrupt for a second because we New Orleanians talk about food so much. It's so central to our culture.
It is essential, and it describes our culture.
It describes our culture. So a very multi-ethnic, multicultural community with foods from all over the world. So growing up, what were some of the favorite foods besides donuts? We know for you that's a whole food group.
That's right.
Besides donuts, what other food did you eat that you think is really authentically, was and still is authentically just New Orleanian?
Without question, the category, first of all, is seafood.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
And seafood was sold in so many different venues and dietary, stylistic places. It was incredibly interesting to me. There were the restaurant proper. Some of them are historic, go back for a century or more, that have been well-established restaurants in New Orleans with French and Creole cuisine par excellence. There were other places that would look like shoestring operations where someone would use what would have been an empty building, and next thing you know, they're selling things out of it. Especially remarkable and memorable in the seafood category, in particular. New Orleans has a beautiful lakeshore drive. It is absolutely stunning and beautiful. It's on the south side of Lake Pontchartrain. That's the location of New Orleans. And the view from this roadway is gorgeous. You can look out onto the Lake Pontchartrain. I have sailed it. I lifeguarded over it. I swam in it. I loved it. I considered it my own lake. People said, "What do you own?" I said, "Not much, but I do own Lake Pontchartrain because I sailed it and because I swam in it and I rescued people as a lifeguard growing up." And I was every summer I was intimately involved with Lake Pontchartrain in some form or fashion and loving it. Well, along this roadway, which is right on Lake Pontchartrain's southern shore, there were buildings that were up that were primarily mini bathhouses offering restrooms, bathroom opportunities, sheltered enough where you could sit down at a picnic table, get out of the hot sun. But in the evenings, as the sun went down and the cool breezes came off of the lake, we could go and sit down next to some of these structures where they would be delivering to the picnic tables around. They would be delivering boiled blue Pontchartrain Lake crabs. Delicious, flavorful, served right out of the boiling pots and set before you. The tables would be lined with newspapers. There were there were two newspapers very prominent, and I think a third minor one. But paper was everywhere. Newspapers. We had newspaper drop. We can't find a newspaper today, right?
That's
it's
right.
impossible. And then the news is questionable. Is it more gossip or is it actually news?
Right.
Letting us engage in it intelligently as citizens. So the spread would be boiled crabs, boiled shrimp, crawfish, which kind of came to its own, really. It was a lowly food, much like a catfish was regarded as lowly food in the 50s. But catfish has taken off and done well. Mississippi has done extremely well with the whole industry that's sprung up with pond-raised catfish throughout the state of Mississippi, sold internationally. It's a great business for Mississippi. But so there was catfish and fishes of other sorts, speckled trout, redfish, flounder. You name it, we had it. We really were in the best location to enjoy all of the wide ranges of God's seafood. It was phenomenal and delicious. So that was a real experience, unique to New Orleans, I think.
I agree.
That may be more
No,
information.
it was good
Okay.
information, and my audience loves to hear about cultural experiences, and a huge part of that in any culture is going to be food.
You learn so much. What's behind it?
Much. That's right. What's behind it? And of course, a lot of people know this, but New Orleans has a rich Spaniard history
Yes.
and a rich French history. What can you tell us about your experience observing that as a child? How did you see that, and or were there parts of the community that were predominantly French, or was it kind of just all melded?
With respect to French and Spanish, I think they were more assimilated into the general population, for the most part. And when I say Spanish, I'm speaking not of South American, Mexican, Central America. I'm speaking of
Spain,
of derivatives from Spain itself, European nation, Western nation. And so those people and their culture was pretty well assimilated. And the same would be true for, just as English were, so would be the French and the Spanish together. And because they were colonial powers, I'm sure that their cuisine became intermixed with some of the colonial experiences they were having around the world. And certainly in the early settling of Louisiana and the Louisiana Territory, which was really the midsection of the United States, almost from Canada down to the Gulf of Mexico, that big swath of land was fought over between British, French, and Spaniards, and it was hotly contested. The Spaniards had influences from Louisiana all the way over to the Floridas, and so it was a contested land with a lot of changes, and probably one of the greatest land deals ever made was the Louisiana Purchase, which kind of locked us into a colonial system, really. And permitted a more peaceful interaction between otherwise warring parties. That kind of settled out. And I guess we started eating real well.
Mm-hmm.
And we started enjoying things with a Spaniard flair, because you get a Mediterranean flair out of that. There's some things that are unique to France that are brought in here, the delicate side of food preparation, sauces, different kinds of imaginative ways of doing anything from, as we would say, soup to nuts, cheeses to wines. And it was a tremendous influence in a real culinary schooling of a colonial population.
And then added to that, of course, would be the African influence.
Absolutely.
From food to culture to music to style to so much.
Yes. And relatedly, the movement of Christians that were run out of Europe, settled in Nova Scotia area, and they became known as the Acadians, who were then pushed out because of some of their religious convictions as much as anything. And they ended up down in some of the most formidable country that Louisiana could offer, the marshes, the swamps, the lowest lands. And they figured out how to make a go of it. And that food became an amalgamation of the Indian population, black population, and then the Acadians from Nova Scotia, the Canada area. And they figured out how to make that work. And some of the most culturally interesting people are the people that we refer to as the Cajuns.
Oh, yes.
They are warm and embracive and hospitable. I can remember as a young adult competing in sailboat competition. I went down to one of the bays there on the west side of Lafayette, Louisiana. It was called Vermilion Bay. Had a race down there that went Saturday and Sunday. That night we went to a Cajun spot. It was built up on stilts over the reeds and marsh grasses of South Louisiana, with a bay leading out to the Gulf of Mexico right nearby. And we went into this place, and the gumbo was fabulous, and everything was wonderful. And the people that were the residents of that chunk of land, they were so great. They invited us to play pool. They especially took to me. We had just a fun time. And next thing you know, I was practically given the keys to the city, asked to come back with my family, bring my wife and my little daughter at the time, and just come in and have a wonderful time. Welcome anytime. Anytime you're here, Dennis. Anytime you're here.
And I think that
It was lovely.
New Orleans
lovely.
at that time especially did have a lot of that Southern, what we know as Southern hospitality. And I think with regard to what we've been talking about, all these ethnic influences, is with our food, New Orleanian food, it's hard to classify it in just one place because, as you said, it's an amalgamation of a lot of different types of people groups and their influences. Let's shift gears for a minute. Okay. New Orleans is known as a party city, a very festive place. There are dark sides to that, but there are some truly beautiful sides to that as well. I'd like to talk about, especially from your childhood, what Mardi Gras, participating in the Mardi Gras celebrations would have been like.
Easy. The Mardi Gras of the 50s was a family affair in the daylight hours. At night, things got very much adult entertainment. But during the day, it was family and child entertainment. It was magical. There were endless numbers of parading bands going by, playing all sorts of music with all kinds of roots to it. Just an amalgamation of music going by, interspersed with what we call floats, usually trailer-drawn contraptions that were decorated elaborately so. It's more than a cottage industry now.
Oh,
but in the very beginning, there were a few people that really were doing a good job of decorating, and it became more and more flamboyant as the years went by, and more elaborate, and more beautiful. Famous people would be able to serve as the king or the queen of a particular parade. I don't know I can't remember if they would have a float in the front or in the very back. Maybe some of both. I can't remember offhand. But it was exciting. We would, as kids, I can remember dressing up several different ways. We dressed up as clowns. Even my cousin was dressed up. And I think he should have stayed in that outfit all year long, the way he behaved. But nonetheless, there was a cousin all dressed up in a clown suit. There was myself, my two little brothers, and we were in tow. There was a time when we were cowboys or I guess pioneering people dressed up in cowboy attire, wagon train style. And there was a wagon that my parents had fixed up, I think a radio flyer wagon, as I recall, a red wagon with hoops and what looked like a Conestoga tent affair around that pulled wagon. It had food and stuff in there. And we would go through the streets of New Orleans. My father was employed by the city. He had a very responsible position. He was the chief electrical inspector for the entire city of New Orleans. He saw from the 50s beyond into the 80s, he saw the boom and development and the building campaigns. That included the New Orleans Super Bowl, for example. And he and the inspectors that worked under him were responsible for electrical safety throughout the city. He took that very seriously. But at Mardi Gras time, it gave him access to City Hall, which had a bird's eye seat over the parades. The parades would always go by City Hall. And so the mayor would be out there to salute or to toast or something like that. Dignitaries would be able to toast different crews that went by with their parades. Then after the real formal fancy parades came what we would call maybe a lower class of parading, but it was a less decorative affair. It was now just kind of a raw trailer with some sides on it, whatever they could think about. After a few drinks, decide, hey, we're going to go in the parade. And so you would have these families get together, and who knows what they were throwing out, but it would usually be beads.
Right, beads for sure.
Multicolored beads for sure.
Little medallions.
Medallions became important, either to designate that particular parade, that particular crew. They threw out their doubloons, it was called.
That's right, doubloons.
And then there would be all kinds of trinkets of all sorts. And every now and then a kid would get their hand pinched up underneath a rolling wheel of one of the parade carts. And so there'd be, I don't think we dealt with fatalities at the time, though the prospects were there and maybe there were some, I don't know. But it was just a jolly time as a family affair through the 50s. Now, as you go through further decades, a lot of things are going on. Wars in Vietnam setting the background for a lot of the things that were going on as we entered into the 60s. The assassinations that took place, I think, colored nationally how we came together and how we were together. But it caused an unfortunate background music for our lives of senses of loss, betrayals. It got to the heart of us, I think, and it started coloring the joyfulness that was otherwise quite well noted in the nation, and in particular in the South and in New Orleans, I think, was affected by that. Although there remained, it's often referred, New Orleans is often referred to as a city that cared for God. But there's been a motion almost in some instances, in some corners of New Orleans today, where the feeling is it's a city that forgot to care. And there it has everything to do with all the things we're seeing now nationally. They're having an impact. The recovery stage that we remain in, the kinds of suffering that New Orleans has had over the recent years. So it's not the same New Orleans of the 50s and 60s. I don't think we ever should try to get back there, because there was some problems, even as I am painting a favorable picture from a child's point of view. There was systemic racism. There was, equal access, but to unequal services, and the misrepresentation of blacks in the heartbeat of the city. Although I must say that within the South, New Orleans, as much as any metro area in the United States, was better blended culturally than most any other place. There was a harmony in New Orleans between black and whites that was uncommon, pleasant to recognize if you were a person of equality and citizenship. That made a difference. Of course, tensions then arose with the forcing of desegregation, and of course that had to come. But I'm not sure that that's been fully settled to the overall peace and settlement of the emerging New Orleans. But I certainly stand to be corrected on some of these things, but it's a perspective that I've had, having gone through New Orleans as a child and into a young adult.
Well, this is valuable because you're sharing not only your childhood perceptions, but what you saw growing up and what you've seen as an adult now. One other aspect of New Orleans I'd like to talk about, which is a celebratory aspect, is the music. The music in New Orleans and how we have such a vibrant, I'd say, musical scene, multiple genres of music, Zydeco music, blues, jazz. We have almost all types of music, and we're known for our jazz, and we've got the Jazz Fest every year in New Orleans as well. Did you ever go to Jazz Fest?
I never have. I was pretty much mostly gone out of New Orleans by then, as Jazz Fest got to be a popular thing. But no, I've never attended it. Although I do remember my daughter and I went to there was a...
it was a reggae concert.
I'm remembering, yeah, that's right. Well, I tell you, yeah, there was a reggae concert that we went to, and I don't think Marley was there.
But he was not, but some of his cohorts were there.
Yeah, but you could tell by the smoke that aspects of him really were there. It was all open outside in City Park, one of the largest municipal parks in all of the United States. It's a beautiful area. So anyway, we went there and enjoyed the music, but didn't particularly care for the color of the air.
Right, it was a little bit too much. So to my guests and viewers, I was going to wait until the end of part one of this episode to say this. But I just want to say that Reverend Dennis Flash is, in actuality, he is my father. And first and foremost, I wanted to interview him as a New Orleanian and just have him be introduced to my show this way. But he is my dad, and so I'm a fourth generation New Orleanian, and we have lots of stories that together we could share.
Yes.
So, but for today, so I am that daughter who was with him at that reggae concert, and he had no idea that it would be that type of atmosphere for us.
I wouldn't normally have invited her on, so I wouldn't have gone to such, but we did.
You're listening to Coloring My Way Across the Globe with Lauren Battistini. For more information, check out lfbcolor.com.
So I think this is a great place. We're still in part one. We'll do the second part of the interview in just a moment. But I thought this would be a great place for us to segue over to, from New Orleans of yesteryear to Natchez, Mississippi of today. So across the Mississippi River from Vidalia, Louisiana, is Natchez, Mississippi, which is where you now live, and you've made your home here, and you've been here for a very long time, and you've been a pillar in the community as a minister. And we'll talk more about your ministerial work in part 2 of the episode. For today, I would really love for you to introduce my viewers to the city of Natchez.
Well, in so many ways, I regard Natchez to be a junior version of New Orleans. The architecture is quite similar. To travel in New Orleans and proceed down St. Charles Avenue, one of the loveliest boulevards in the South, and see the magnificent homes that have been preserved and well cared for, it's breathtaking. I don't know how many of those homes are available for tourists to come and tour, but in Natchez, it was learned that people really want to do that. Because Natchez, in the early 1900s, in order to create outsider interest in coming to Natchez, the garden clubs were very, very active. They were almost formidable and sometimes in conflict with one another. This was a group of women. Yes, they're called a garden club, and that seems safe enough, but these were very competitive, very driven women in Natchez, Mississippi. And so originally the pilgrimage to Natchez was motivated on the basis of, let's go see the lovely flowers that are growing in Natchez. And apparently that was satisfactory to the garden clubs. But you would come and see the outside of the estates in Natchez. Well, there was one spring where a deep freeze came right in the middle, or right as it was getting ready to open up, on display for seeing and observing the flowers, all of the beauty of Natchez in the colors of the many flowers and plants that grow here. And it killed them all. It was a disaster. People learned about it. The traffic had fallen off. It was not a successful year for pilgrimage based around floral arrangements. One lady whose descendants became part of the church that I had organized here in Natchez, it was their mother that became instrumental in rallying the troops and perhaps instigating maybe even cooperation between the garden clubs to realize that the homes might be an opportunity and might be a draw, as much as could have been the scenery in the spring of the flowers and the trees and all the green growth that takes place in the spring here, uniquely to us, I think. And it's grown. And so when we speak about pilgrimage today, we're talking about we're the inheritors of those 1930-ish thinkers that were figuring out how to revitalize or retain tourism within Natchez. And they resorted to the structures of Natchez, which are throughout the town and out in the rural parts around the town. And they were magnificent structures, many of which were put together with slave labor. And there were people that were owned New Orleans, not New Orleans, but Natchez, I think, was at the time of the Civil War, or the beginnings of the Civil War, had the second largest slave trading business in the South. There's a place called Forks of the Road, which is in central part of the city of Natchez. And it's been recently marked. I think it should have been happening a long time ago to designate that place and clear it out for people to understand what occurred for our people back then, that we were trading in human lives. And that story should never be tired in the telling. It should always be uppermost that it is possible for human beings to treat each other as if we're one another's property, which is entirely against the moral law that's built in all of us, and just the way we want to treat each other in our communities. So it has that history as well. But it is a lovely place, and it looks a lot like New Orleans.
It does.
In so many ways. And finally, we're seeing, I say finally, when we first got here in late 1996, to plant a church that Lauren had referred to, there were very few places to eat, to enjoy, really a nice dining experience. We had quite a number of gin joints. There was a lot of places you could drink. And in fact, I think Natchez has probably had, like New Orleans, a pretty high share of real imbibers. Maybe some that liked it a little too much. But it's a festive place. New Orleans was always... My wife, who grew up in northern Mississippi and married me when we were living near New Orleans in Slidell, she said, you people never stop. You go from one celebration to the next. When I was a child, I'd get depressed after Christmas because there was nothing for us to do there in northern Mississippi, in the little town of Winona, Mississippi. Mm-hmm. But here, you just go from one thing to the next, and you end up with this gigantic celebration called Mardi Gras. Yeah. And then, and it's just, St. Patty's Day, everything, the Jazz Festival.
There's always a parade.
There's always a reason to celebrate in New Orleans, and Natchez is right on the heels of that sentiment. And is as almost as exciting as New Orleans can be.
I would agree with you. So I'm going to shift from calling my guest Reverend Flach to I'm just going to go ahead and call him Dad now that the cat's out of the bag.
The cat is out of the bag.
The cat is out of the bag. So Dad, my viewers, my listeners really enjoy hearing from natives of a city where they can go, places that are off the beaten path, places to eat, scenic routes to travel. What can you tell us if we had 2 or 3 days here in Natchez to just explore and experience? What would you have us do?
Well, first thing, I guess I would throw away the idea that there's a beaten path and a lightly trodden path.
Okay.
A lot of Natchez, that is the core of Natchez, has been discovered and remains worth seeing, even if it's a well-traveled path.
Fair point.
Certainly the idea of circa 1800 structures and 1700 structures are worthwhile seeing, especially the well-preserved ones. And, generations have seen them before you. Many will see them after you. But they're nonetheless testaments to how to live in sometimes the difficulties of the climate of the South. Our summers can be, really, really hard on people and animals. To be in a largely agricultural community, to see how people modernize themselves in a metro area, in this case Natchez, the town or the city of Natchez. So the structures and the pilgrimage tours are worth participating in. There are horse-driven carriage rides through the city that will give you a close picture of the multi-ethnic view of Natchez, places where our Black brothers and sisters had successful businesses or operations. We've got famous Black leaders that were emerging in these olden days, and stories and books written about them and their contributions. Uh, we've had strong leadership with Black and white in the communities, and we're continue to learn how to meld cultures together to work around principles that we can hold in common for the betterment of the city. We have a very vibrant mayor who is absolutely cross-generational, cross-cultural, and is a, it's going to sound funny coming from me, he's a doll, my wife would say. He is just everything to our community, and he is a force to be reckoned with in the best sense of that word.
And I had the opportunity to meet him personally a couple of nights ago at Arts Natchez. A bunch of artists gather there and offer their works, and there are lots of different events that they do. And there was a featured artist who happens to also be from New Orleans. Jax is her name?
Jax. Mm-hmm.
Jax. She's a book author, but also an artist. And I had the opportunity to meet the mayor, and I would agree he was very kind, warm, very friendly, very hospitable, pleasant to speak with.
Mayor Dan Gibson.
Mayor Dan
his
Gibson.
name, and we're so fortunate to have him. He'll be running for office again, and we'll be happy to support him again. He's head and shoulders above anything we've ever seen in our town.
So, what other activities could we do in Natchez, or some of your favorite places to eat? Because we're all about food.
Given the size of our town, we don't have nearly the number, and couldn't possibly support the number of restaurants that you have available to you in New Orleans. But we are seeing finer and finer establishments coming here. We have a wonderful Mediterranean restaurant. My dear friend Holcomb owns and runs a restaurant in the guest house. It's one of the bed and breakfast opportunities in the center in the downtown section of Natchez. And you would be well served by going there and eating at the Mediterranean restaurant that is part of the guest house. Fabulous food, well done, fresh always, delicious. There's a place called Natchez Under the Hill. Now, under the hill means you're right at the edge of the river. It's a low spot. We're up on a bluff, but Natchez Under the Hill is under the hill. You're looking 200 when you get down there on this street. It's one street that didn't wash away in the 1927 flood that devastated the South, and especially the lower parts of Mississippi and all of Louisiana. It was a dreadful thing, and we developed levee systems thereafter. The levee systems were not always what you see today. They were not in place. So Natchez
Under the Hill.
Magnolia Bar and Grill. Delicious food, well prepared, combinations of meats, salads, various kinds of very good fresh salads. I mentioned seafood, so that's a great place to eat. Also serves good cocktails. I'm trying to think. We have some wonderful places for Asian foods. You'd be surprised how many. We have a Thai restaurant called Planet Thai right in the downtown section of Natchez. Very good, authentic Thai food by Thai entrepreneurs here in Natchez. Anne, who is the young lady that runs it and is part owner with her parents, she works very, very hard with her mother. Used to be her father. I don't think he's as active as he used to be. But they run a great, great, great restaurant. A fun place is called Little Easy. And it is kind of on the edge of downtown Natchez, just past the post office in the next block. And they have, it's called Little Easy, New Orleans. You remember I said to you that Natchez is a lot like a little New Orleans.
Instead of the Big Easy.
And New Orleans, yeah, as Lauren said, New Orleans is known as the Big Easy for all kinds of reasons. You can fill in the blanks and still be right on any blank you fill.
Probably.
And then here we are in a little micro version in Natchez, Mississippi of what New Orleans could feel like. So it's a little easy. And they've named the place. And they've got all kinds of interesting assortments of food. It's not a heavy meal place, but it's a place for lighter foods, nice, sensible breakfast. Healthy concerns play out in that menu. There is a place called Little Tokyo, also with respect to Far East cultural foods. It is called Little Tokyo. The people that work it and run it and own it are some of the most hardworking people, and they are from Cambodia. And Cambodia has a storied history of a lot of violence, especially contemporaneous with the Vietnam War. The people there suffered a lot, so some of the folks that work there are people that know how hard life turns sometimes and how devastating things can be on the international front. But they're here, and we're glad they are, and they serve great food, and they are very hardworking, dear people.
Those are plenty of choices.
And there's more.
There's more.
There's more.
Two other items about Natchez I want to talk about. One is the balloon festival that you all have. I've never gone. I need to. And the second, don't you have an opera here?
We sure do. We have what's called the Festival of Music. One of my dearest friends, he is deceased now. I was his pastor, and he would lead our singing at the church that did get organized. He stood in front and led us in singing, congregational singing. And also, he was the artistic director for what was then called the Natchez Music Festival, I think. I may be getting the name wrong. It's been a while because it has changed name. But it is a festival of music that lasts multiple weeks, maybe a month and a half, I think, something in that range, where there are things that go on during the week, as well as things for sure going on the weekend. We've seen Porgy and Bess. We've seen operatic Les Mis performed. All kinds of things from, highbrow to, real earthy performance. And it really has become even more introduced greater variety now than ever. There is, the America's Songbook. I'm not sure exactly where that's located, but we speak about America's Songbook, some of the big hits. Well, that has recently been done, and you heard us brag about the mayor of Natchez, Dan Gibson. He sat at, just a few weeks ago, he sat in an antebellum home at a grand piano and played music from what he identified as the American Songbook. And it was an intimate crowd in the room. It was a magical evening. People sang along. They enjoyed. Wine was served. No one wants to miss that. But we had a wonderful time. And it was the mayor. And he sat with not one sheet of music in front of him. And from memory, he played hit after hit, recognizable hit after hit, most of which were singable, most of which the audience sang. And it was a beautiful, pleasant, peaceful, restful experience. And that man brought that to us. It was the gift of himself to us, and it was wonderful. Things like that happen all the time here.
That's the advantage of living in a small-ish community. You can become very well connected, and that just seems to have something for everyone. And let's not forget what I asked earlier about the balloon festival. That's got to be one of the most colorful times of the year. I've got to attend that myself, so I can capture some great photography.
Yeah, when we first moved, we came in so late into Natchez. It was late. The balloon festival happens, I think it's the third weekend in the month. I could be wrong about that, but it's in the later part of October, the month of October.
Okay.
And the weather is usually pretty good because it's, shaping up to be fall, moving into, a cooler season. Sometimes the weather can be a little tricky, especially the winds. That's with a balloon rising up. they refer to it as the balloon races. We're going to have the balloon races. I'm not comfortable with that. I don't see any of them really moving that fast. And the steering of them, really goes as the wind goes. That's where you go.
Mm-hmm.
And at certain levels and elevations, the winds can be moving one way, at another elevation, another way. And you got to find the wind that's blowing where you want to go. And sometimes you don't find it. But anyway, we will have, 50 plus balloons going up. They're all brilliant. I mean, by the very nature and construction of the balloons, they are like kitty balloons on a giant scale. Wicker baskets.
Multicolored.
And so on Friday, which is the first action, the balloons, as it turns dark, sun going down in the darkness, they do what's called the balloon glow. And these are all of the people gathered around, usually near the levee, overlooking the Mississippi River, or the bluff that overlooks the Mississippi River. Before you go down under the hill, you're still up high. And so they will all fire up their balloons, and they will inflate the balloon, which is really a bag that contains and controls the gas heated air that's forced in by fan into the body of the balloon. So it swells up, but you're looking at these flames that are just pumping in the heat to inflate the balloon. They don't overinflate them so that they fly away, but just enough that you can see the glow all around you of these beautiful, beautiful designed and colorful balloons. That's something to behold. The next day becomes the balloon race. And I don't know what the rules are.
I don't either.
I have no idea.
It's not my sport.
I don't know how you win it. I just don't know. But it's beautiful. We also have, for the families with children, there's a whole midway that gets set up on top of the bluff that kids enjoy in their games of chance and any number of things, and rides of all sorts. So it's a place for the kids. There's confections sold all around. Don't forget pralines when you can find them between New Orleans. New Orleans is the best place to find pralines. I'm going to segue back to New Orleans. But pralines is a great southern treat, especially out of New Orleans, and well made. Mary does a great job. My wife produces a magnificent praline.
I've sampled them. She does.
You can't eat just one.
No, I can't eat just one.
I'm testimony to that.
So this is a good place for us to conclude this part of the interview. We've gone from Reverend Flach, a.k.a. Dad's, history in New Orleans growing up in the 50s and beyond, to his adult years here, his settling in Natchez, Mississippi, a most colorful, vibrant town. I hope that you will stay tuned for part 2 of the interview, in which we will be discussing Reverend Flach's ministerial career, his calling, his vocation, which has been predominantly in the areas of church planting, but also global missions work and some leadership within the Presbyterian Church. So I hope you'll stay tuned for episode 2. I really enjoyed this. Thank you for part 1, Dad.
I love being with you to do this.
I love being with you too.
I think it's a great idea, and I think that this is going to really be enjoyed by a lot of people.
I
just
believe
the way
that.
you do it.
Thank you, and I hope so. And my mission here is always to invite guests who I find to be very colorful and have wonderful stories to tell, and who have some travel experience, and who have some culture, and have just a curiosity about the world in which we live. And that certainly describes you, Dad. So stay tuned for next week's part 2. Thank you all for being here, and until we see you again, have a colorful week. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Coloring My Way Across the Globe. I hope that you've enjoyed the conversation, and we would love to stay connected with you throughout the week. The best way to connect is by subscribing to our newsletter at www.lfbcolor.com. That's www.L as in Lauren, F as in Frank, B as in boy, color, COLOR.com. Also, you may find us on Instagram using the same handle, LFB Color, for the latest stories, podcast guest profiles, travel photography, language learning diaries, and my own colorful art. Hope to see you there, friends. Thank you again.